The lost sheep. Do you remember that story from your Sunday school days? It's a reminder of it, a fairly bright reminder of it here right in front of us. Jesus talked about the lost sheep. You remember singing the song? There were 99 that safely lay in the shelter of the fold, but one was out on the hills away, far off from the gates of gold. How many of you remember that song? Wow, not very many. You have such a limited repertoire of hymns and songs. It's kind of sad. Anyway, you know, when I was a kid, and we remember that 90 and 9, in fact, I had an aunt that told me that, my Aunt Alice, who was very faithful Christian Catholic woman. She said, you know who the 90 and 9, the one lost sheep is? You know, it's those people on Madison Street. Madison Street in Chicago in those times was where all the bums, they were called bums, remember? The street people hung out there. Those were the 9. That was the one that was lost, that the 90 and 9 had to go find, those people that were lost. And the one that was lost was always a drunk or a non-believer or an atheist or someone like that, and usually always thought of as a morally defective person. They're lost. We had very narrow understandings of those things, and in fact, all of us are growing and trying to understand the Bible in a much bigger way than we ever have before. I mean, that's the ongoing part of being a Christian. But that one that was gone, because of the way the story is told, was always thought of as an individual. There's one lost one out there, you know. There's one that we've got to go find. And it was always an individual thing. It rides very well in the United States because we are such an individualist nation, you know. We're a bunch of John Waynes, and what would be the woman equivalent of John Wayne? Annie Oakley. I don't know. Well, who did you say? Katharine Hepburn. Yeah, that'd be a good example. But you see, Matthew's gospel is not really written about individuals. Matthew writes for a community. He's writing what he writes, the story of Jesus, for this community that has now formed. And he's writing 80 or 90 years after the birth of Christ. So that means 60 years probably after Christ was crucified. And this community is living in a hostile environment. People aren't real grateful and happy to see these Christians around. And Matthew is taking their corporate life very seriously. It's very important to be part of this community. And being in this community has a lot of responsibilities. And any kind of a loss to this community, whether it's an individual or group of individuals, this loss, in Matthew's mind, is felt by the whole community. Not just one or two other people, not just the family, but the whole community feels this. Today, finding the lost, helping the lost, bringing the lost back into community is much more complicated. Because we're not only looking for individuals now, we're looking for whole groups of people now who are caught up in systems that cause them to be lost. It's kind of interesting to me that the evangelical churches, which for years have been focused on 2 or 3 issues, largely abortion and marriage rights and very little else, very strongly, have now made a huge switch. And many of the pastors of these big evangelical churches are saying, you know, we got involved in a lot of politics. And when you mix faith with politics, you know what you get? Politics. And so now, all of a sudden, the concern about poverty and the environment and so many other kinds of issues where we have been lost and people have been lost in this, in the midst of this. People of Haiti are a perfect example. They are lost people. They are lost in this poverty, which is unrelenting. And the things that happen in those communities are just so despicable that we comfortable Americans can't even imagine what that's like. Well, there's a problem closer to home. A great theologian once said that you should preach with the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other. So I not only have a newspaper article here, but I have something from AARP magazine. Those of you who are younger don't even know what I'm talking about, but you will, believe me. There's a gathering, you maybe saw this in Tuesday's telegram. There's a group trying to gather care packages for our soldiers who are serving in Afghanistan, largely because that is another godforsaken place, not literally, but a place that is just an awful place to be. And I guess in the winters there, it's just terrible. And obviously, it's probably even more dangerous there for our soldiers than in Iraq, if that's possible. And these soldiers are some of the lost ones, because we forget about this, you know. We pray for them and we don't think about the torment and the loneliness and the awful things that are happening to them. And you know, they're losing loved ones in their families at home, and they can't go home and participate. They can't grieve. They're essentially grieving by themselves, which is a very bad thing to do. And so it's great to see somebody organizing this kind of thing so that some of the things that they can use are sent to them. But it's not the toiletries and the food, although there's nothing like a bag of double-stuffed Oreos to be arriving in the mail. Let me tell you, I remember that from my Navy days. But it's that they are remembered. They get mail. Those of you who haven't been in the service, when there's mail call and you see a whole bunch of guys who never get any mail, it kind of tears at your heart a little bit. Doesn't anybody remember they're here? At any rate, so that's an important thing. And then an article was in the AARP, was actually a response. This is a letter from a woman in response to an article they wrote about our injured soldiers now coming back, injured military. Her name is Janice Galatis, and she writes this. My husband was injured by an IED, that's an improvised explosive device, and 19 surgeries later, he's still alive. But the journey hasn't been easy. I had to constantly fight the hospital staff for necessary treatment. And I even mopped floors to minimize his risk of infection. The government needs to ensure that these veterans are properly cared for before they are shuffled into the VA system, which, as writer Barry Yeoman reported, this is the previous article, the VA system is ill-equipped to deal with these overwhelming injuries. We hear about this all the time. So this, the man, her husband, the soldier, is lost. He's lost in our own system. The kind of system that you and I would rely on to help us. So when this woman leaves the 90 and 9 to go and search for this one who happens to be her husband, this is what the search is like. She has to fight with the hospital staff to get the right treatment. She has to mop floors in order to fend off infection. When's the last, some of you have had a lot of hot time in the hospital, when's the last time they asked you to mop the floor, or, you know, bring in a relative and mop the floor because, you know, there's a lot of infection going on? What is happening here? And these are our loved ones. In terms of our community as Americans, we are very patriotic waving the flag, but why is this happening? Flag waving is of no use at all. Shuffled into an ill-equipped VA system. Well, this is the Lost Sheep 2008 version. And the estimate for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan is going to, when the dust clears away, $3 trillion. I don't even know how many zeros that is. $3 trillion.